The hidden truth behind America's most dangerous prison gang clashes. What happens when prison gangs clash? The most deadly confrontations. If you think you've seen danger, you haven't seen what happens when prison alliances snap. Subscribe, like, comment, because this story is about to drag you straight into the heart of the most feared clashes behind American prison walls. The first sign that something was wrong came before sunrise at Redwood State Penitentiary, a high-security California facility already known for its strict routines and internal tensions. A guard making his early rounds on C Block noticed a strange silence, the kind that didn't belong in a unit usually echoing with morning clatter. When he reached the common area, he froze. The room looked disturbed. Tables slightly shifted. Personal items left out of place. A chessboard overturned, pieces scattered across the floor. Nothing broken. Nothing extreme. But enough to signal that something had moved quietly through the unit long before anyone else woke. Lieutenant Evan Rourke, a calm but sharp investigator with 2 decades of experience in California's correctional system, arrived moments later. He had worked in facilities from Folsom to Corcoran, and he recognized subtle patterns most people missed. One glance at the room and he murmured, "Someone was testing the boundaries." Rourke moved through the unit with slow precision, studying details. A door latch slightly scuffed. A bench nudged a few inches out of alignment. Footprints in a patch of dust that weren't from staff boots. Nothing dramatic, but to Rourke, it screamed coordination. Redwood housed members linked to long-standing rival groups. Investigators had seen shifts in behavior over the past month, quieter conversations, new seating patterns in the chow hall, coded notes intercepted in laundry bins. Nothing actionable. But tension was building, the kind that historically led to lockdowns across California prisons. Sergeant Maya Ellison, head of gang intelligence, joined Rourke near the unit's rear hallway. She held a small folded piece of paper, confiscated just minutes earlier from a nervous inmate during routine screening. "I think this explains the silence," she said. Inside was a message written in tight, controlled handwriting. "Tonight was the signal. Tomorrow we move." Rourke exhaled slowly. "We need to know what move means." Ellison nodded. "It means someone is about to test control of the unit. Maybe more than the unit." They immediately ordered a full search of C Block. Officers discovered nothing dangerous, but they found something far more concerning, a makeshift map of Redwood's exercise yard, marked with arrows showing movement patterns. Someone had been planning routes, timings, meeting points. Rourke studied the map carefully. This isn't one person. This is an internal network. And when he turned it over, he found a second note. "History repeats." Ellison's face tightened. California prison investigators knew that phrase well. It referenced past clashes, coordinated events from the 1980s and 1990s where communication between units spiraled into widespread disruption. These incidents were never spontaneous. They were triggered by outside pressures, leadership disputes, or coded signals passed between facilities. Rourke checked the logs. 2 weeks earlier, an inmate transferred from a different prison with documented ties to a long-standing group conflict. Last night, he had been moved to administrative housing, not for discipline, but because of a clerical error. The timing felt too convenient. Before Rourke could dig deeper, a call burst over the radio. "Lieutenant, you need to come to the kitchen loading area." Rourke and Ellison hurried down the corridor. At the loading bay, a guard pointed toward a supply crate. Inside was a hidden compartment containing a stack of notebooks, all blank except one. It held a detailed list of names, dates, and supply drops. Not weapons. Not contraband. Meetings. Conversations. Behavioral shifts. A record of activity tracing back 6 months. "This is surveillance," Ellison whispered. "Internal. Someone's been studying the whole prison." Rourke flipped to the final page. A single line stood out. "When they clash, we take control." Rourke felt a cold weight settle in his chest. This wasn't just rising tension. Someone was engineering it. Before he could say a word, a guard sprinted toward them, breathless. "Lieutenant, 2 units just went into lockdown. Something erupted in A Block. Cameras caught movement we can't identify." You need to see this now. Rourke and Ellison exchanged a look. Whatever was happening inside Redwood was no longer contained to one quiet morning. It had begun, and someone wanted it to spread. Lieutenant Evan Rourke reached the A-block control room just as alarms began flashing on the monitors. Red indicators pulsed over multiple sections, signaling emergency lockdown protocols. Officers and supervisors crowded around the screens, their faces tense with confusion rather than panic. The kind of confusion that comes when something doesn't fit the usual patterns. Sergeant Maya Ellison pointed at the central monitor. Look at this. The footage showed two groups of inmates pacing opposite sides of the recreation pen, separated by fencing. Normally, their paths were predictable, structured, overseen closely by staff. But today, something was wrong. They weren't pacing randomly. They were moving in synchronized patterns, back and forth, stopping at the same intervals, turning at the same time. Signals. Rourke leaned closer. This isn't spontaneous. They're communicating. One officer swallowed hard. Communicating what? Before Rourke could answer, the camera glitched, a brief distortion. When the feed returned, one of the inmates had slipped a folded piece of paper under the gate to the opposite pen. The recipient picked it up casually, almost too casually, as if he wanted the camera to see nothing unusual. But Rourke saw everything. Pull that camera back 10 seconds, he ordered. The officer rewound the footage. As the inmate bent to retrieve the note, the corner of his jacket lifted just enough to reveal a hand-drawn emblem stitched inside the lining. It wasn't allowed. It wasn't part of the uniform. It was a symbol long associated with a group known for orchestrating tension across multiple facilities. Ellison's voice tightened. That group hasn't tried anything in years. They don't need to, Rourke said. Someone is waking up old alliances. A sudden radio call interrupted them. Lieutenant, we've got movement near the library access tunnel. Officers are requesting your presence immediately. Rourke and Ellison rushed down the corridor, passing officers preparing emergency lockdown gear. The atmosphere in Redwood had shifted. Something was building, something no one had anticipated. When they arrived at the library hallway, an officer pointed to a maintenance access door. It was unlocked. Inside, the narrow tunnel smelled faintly of dust and cleaning chemicals. Along the wall, dozens of small chalk markings lined the lower bricks, arrows, numbers, initials. Ellison knelt. These are trail markers. Coded directions. Similar markings had been found in California facilities decades earlier, used to coordinate movement in complex structures where spoken communication wasn't possible. Rourke scanned the logs. The inmate who had access to this tunnel was the same recently transferred individual who arrived from another high-security prison with active behavioral notes. This wasn't coincidence. As they examined the corridor, another officer stepped in holding a folder he found behind a utility panel. Sir, you need to see this. Rourke opened it and found pages filled with hand-drawn diagrams of Redwood. The kitchen, the laundry bay, the yard gates, all marked with timing estimates, patrol routes, and coded initials. But one detail stood out above everything else, a heading at the top of the first page. Reenactment strategy. Ellison read aloud, stunned. Reenactment? Of what? Rourke turned to the next page. It referenced the Lucasville Uprising of 1993, one of the most violent, complex prison standoffs in modern U.S. history. A diagram circled a phrase, multi-group diversion tactics. This is a blueprint for tension, Rourke said. A model. Someone studied past clashes and wants to recreate the conditions, not the event, but the confusion. Ellison felt a chill. Why recreate confusion? To distract us, Rourke answered, from what they actually want. Before they could analyze further, a loud thud echoed through the hallway, the sound of a heavy object striking metal. An officer burst in. Lieutenant, something's happening in D-Wing. Both groups moved at the same time. They're not fighting, but they're positioning themselves. We've never seen this. Ellison stood abruptly. They're waiting for a signal. Rourke grabbed the folder. And someone inside Redwood knows exactly when that signal is coming. As they reached D-Wing, the sight stopped everyone cold. Inmates stood in silent formation along the walkway railings, not speaking, not clashing, just watching. The eerie stillness felt like a held breath across the entire unit. Then Rourke spotted him, the transferred inmate, standing at the center of the group, his expression calm, almost calculating. He lifted his chin slightly, making deliberate eye contact with Rourke. A challenge. A warning. A message. Ellison whispered, "He's not here to fight." Rourke nodded slowly. "No. He's here to start something much bigger." And that was when the lights flickered, once, twice, then stabilized. Inmates shifted subtly in response. The signal had been sent. Everything was about to begin. The flickering lights steadied, and an uneasy quiet settled over D-Wing. Lieutenant Evan Rourke felt every muscle in his body tighten as the inmates shifted subtly into new positions along the walkway railings. Their movements weren't chaotic. They were organized, deliberate, controlled. This wasn't the start of a violent outbreak. This was coordination. Sergeant Maya Ellison leaned close. "This is formation behavior. They're waiting for instructions." Rourke nodded slowly. And the signal came from somewhere inside Redwood. He scanned the block. The transferred inmate, the one who had arrived only weeks earlier, stood at the center of the upper tier, hands clasped behind his back, posture calm. It was the kind of posture someone used when they knew they were being watched and wanted to project control. Suddenly, the PA system crackled. A distorted voice attempted to come through, but only static echoed across the unit. Officers exchanged worried glances. Communications interference inside a prison was rare, and never a coincidence. Rourke signaled to lock down the wing, but before officers could move, a single inmate stepped forward on the lower tier. He placed a folded piece of paper on the ground, slid it toward the railing, and then stepped back. No words. No noise. Just silence. Rourke motioned for an officer to retrieve the note. The officer approached carefully, picked it up, and handed it to Rourke. It contained just 2 words. "Stand down." Ellison frowned. "Who's telling us to stand down?" Rourke shook his head. "Not them. Someone else." Before they could decode the message, another radio transmission broke through. "Lieutenant, we've discovered something in the administrative wing. You need to see this immediately. It's not just one block. This is coordinated across 3 facilities." Rourke and Ellison hurried down the corridor. Officers cleared a path quickly, sensing the urgency. When they entered the small administrative conference room, Captain Drew Bishop stood beside a table covered with documents. He pointed at a series of intercepted communications, letters, coded notes, and fragments of conversation transcribed from monitored calls. Bishop looked pale. "This isn't a single facility issue. These groups have been coordinating communication between Redwood, Sierra Ridge, and Folsom." Rourke lifted one document showing identical symbols sent between inmates in all 3 prisons. Ellison whispered, "They've been building an alliance." "Not exactly," Bishop corrected. "It's not an alliance. It's a controlled standoff, synchronized tension. They're creating simultaneous pressure points across the state." Rourke exhaled sharply. "But what's the purpose?" Bishop slid a final document forward. A shipment schedule. It showed a delivery truck that would arrive at Redwood in less than an hour, mislabeled with an incorrect manifest. Ellison's eyes widened. They wanted to divert attention. All of this, the movements, the cues, the formations, it's a massive distraction. Rourke nodded. Someone is using the illusion of a gang clash to mask a larger operation. Officers quickly reviewed the truck manifest. The driver wasn't a regular. The route had changed last minute. The package contents were vague. Nothing dangerous, but significant. Inside the mislabeled shipment were stacks of legal documents belonging to inmates across several prisons. Ellison realized it immediately. These files, they include appeal records, transfer requests, administrative reviews. Someone was trying to reroute or tamper with them. Rourke stared at the pages. And the easiest way to hide a paperwork manipulation is to create a prison-wide emergency. Everyone looks at the chaos. Nobody looks at the files. Just then, an officer burst into the room. Lieutenant, the inmate from D Wing, the transferred one, is requesting to speak with you. Alone. Rourke and Ellison exchanged a cautious look but followed the officer back toward D Wing. The inmate waiting for them stood calmly, hands behind his back, expression unreadable. Lieutenant Rourke, he said evenly. You figured out enough to know this wasn't about violence. Rourke nodded. You engineered the tension. I highlighted the tension, the inmate corrected. It already existed. I just organized it. Ellison stepped forward. For what purpose? The inmate studied her carefully. To expose the administrative network that's been redirecting legal documents. Someone has been tampering with appeals. Erasing steps. Reassigning cases. Not for gang purposes, for power. And you used multiple prison groups to reveal it? Rourke asked. He nodded. Because nobody listens to one inmate. But when the entire system moves, even slightly, people start paying attention. Rourke realized the truth. This wasn't a clash between gangs. It was a controlled demonstration designed to expose something far larger and more dangerous. Ellison crossed her arms. And now that we've found the evidence? The inmate smiled faintly, eyes steady. Now you'll have to decide whether to bury it or bring it into the light. Before they could respond, alarms sounded again, this time from the administrative wing, not the housing units. Bishop's voice came through the radio, trembling slightly. Lieutenant, you'd better get down here. Someone just tried to access the document vault. And it wasn't an inmate. Rourke felt a chill. The real threat wasn't inside the cell blocks. It was inside the system itself.